Channel open. Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on June 20th, 2020, and is current through Star Trek Picard Season 1, so beware of spoilers. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a 30-minute news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in a new golden age of Star Trek. There are 6 television shows in production, possibly more on the way, and enough merchandise to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me, and I'll help you sort the real facts from a lot of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone, and my guest this week is returning guest Bill Mann. Bill, welcome back to WeeklyTrek.
Thank you so much for having me. I love being on WeeklyTrek, talking about all the exciting new things that are coming down the pike and what's happening. So really excited to talk.
All right, Bill. Well, you know the drill. I want to know something that's got you feeling good about Star Trek at the moment. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
What's got me moving at Warp 10? What doesn't have me excited? There's so much to choose from. To tie it into one of the things I'm sure we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, Lower Decks feels like it's getting closer, and the more I read about it, the more I am in love with the idea. It's a show that I don't want to say I was ambivalent about at the very, very outset. I was intrigued and excited by the promise of something different, but with every tweet from Mike McMahon and factoring things like that in with tangible things to pull from, like The Escape Artist, which you wrote from a few years back, like it all just feels like it's coming together, and I'm really, really excited to see what that's going to be all about. Everything I hear is very exciting.
I rewatched The Escape Artist a week or so ago because the Blu-ray of the short tracks had come out. So I figured I'll rewatch them all in addition to watching all the expanded materials. And I was struck once again by how I think that is probably my favorite of all of the short tracks they've done to date, because it was just so perfect for the medium.
Yes.
It was 15 minutes long, and it didn't need to be any longer, and it didn't feel too short, and it doesn't need a sequel. It told a tight, coherent story that was fun and, genuinely very funny. And that, I think for me, it was The Escape Artist that made me turn the corner on Lower Decks. When they first announced an animated comedy Star Trek show, I was a little bit like, I don't know, this is necessarily going to be for me. But from the moment that I saw Escape Artist, I was like, I'm all in on this show, and I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, I couldn't echo that more. I love what he does in The Escape Artist with the unconventional structure of it. He flexes with that enough where I feel like, along with everything else I've learned about Mike McMahon over the past couple of years, that I have at this point no reason to be anything but excited and optimistic, and I can't wait.
Absolutely. Well, we'll talk more about Lower Decks in just a few minutes because it's our top story today. My thing I'm feeling good about Star Trek this week is TrekCore posted on their Twitter feed a video of a syndication commercial from the early 90s for Star Trek The Next Generation, set to the very famous Billy Joel song, We Didn't Start the Fire. Did you see this?
I did see it, and it was very funny and really, really, it might be the coolest Star Trek TV spot commercial. Like there's a legendary series of like syndicated ads over the years for different shows, but that's the one for me. That's so cool. And I had never seen it before. That was the first time I had seen it.
Yeah, I had never seen it after. And if you're listening and you have no idea what I'm talking about, it won't quite do it justice because you won't have the visuals. But I am going to drop in the audio track just so you can enjoy the lyrics.
Jean-Luc, Shorty Specs, mysteries on the holodecks, asteroids, triple droids, telepathic betazoids, transporter, deadly claw, visitor from LA Law, photons, no Kirk, captain has gone berserk, shuttlecraft, Council Troy, Dr. Crusher's little boy, Klingon rights, parasites, new heights, phaser fights, Data's head, Tasha's dead, Riker's hanging by a thread, celebration, transformations, everyone to battle station. Start the series. It's the next generation on your favorite station. We didn't start the series, but when we are gone, it'll still be on and on. We didn't start the series. It's the next generation on your favorite station. We didn't start the series.
Yeah, one of the best things about TrekCore is that, particularly on their YouTube channel, there is this treasure trove and wormhole that you can get sucked into of commercials like that, blast from the past, that I'm sure many, many people have never seen if they haven't done the deep dive into that channel. And I would encourage everybody to pick a lazy afternoon, and you'll end up spending more time than you bargained for watching silly, goofy, really funny, really clever at sometimes, like the one you just talked about, the Star Trek commercials that are unexpected and really, really fun.
All right. Well, with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
So our top story this week is a bit of a press push seems to have started for Star Trek Lower Decks. We have not heard much about the show since, I guess it was Mike McMahon's appearance at Destination Star Trek London, which was all the way back in November at this point, other than a few tweets in which he has sort of provided updates on the progress of the show in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Seems like not too much of an impact on Lower Decks thus far, and it's still on course to premiere this year. And I think that was reinforced by the fact that Entertainment Weekly did an interview with Mike McMahon that went up a few days ago, in which he did provide some small new details about the show, but we also, perhaps most excitingly, got 2 new stills, which look like they come directly from episodes of the show that show our crew and our heroes in action. So as it relates to sort of the new little details that we got about the show itself, I mean, this was very much kind of a pitch piece to the Entertainment Weekly readership, not necessarily to Star Trek fans. So, some of the stuff we had heard before and were pretty familiar with, but there was some interesting kind of little new tidbits that came out. I mean, I think one, he sort of talked again about, it is an animated show, but it is more of an adult show. He says, though, it leans much more PG-13 than it does R-rated. He says it's definitely not a kid show, but only because it's a little more complex than a kid show would be. He also talked about, he is obviously most famous for being one of the co-executive producers of Rick and Morty, so talks about Lower Decks in the context of the Rick and Morty approach to science fiction, which is very much sort of deconstructing some of these sci-fi conceits. McMahon sort of indicates that Lower Decks goes in a very different direction from that, in that he says it treats the mythological sci-fi things just as important as a regular Trek show, while finding new stories to tell just from a different angle. It's not disassembling mythological sci-fi things, it's treating them as an important for everybody on the starship as it would be in a regular Star Trek show. I think, again, sort of basically saying the way this has been passed to us as the Star Trek fan community has been Lower Decks is canon, it fits into the canon, it fits into the continuity, all the kind of things that you care about in a regular Star Trek show, you will care about on this show as well. He talked a little bit more about the perspective. He says the big stories are happening on the bridge crew, and there's more kind of social, emotional stories happening to the lower deckers, which I think he uses that term a few times in the interview, and I think is sort of the term that he's using to describe the main characters of the show, the lower deckers. I think that's very fun. Talked a little bit about the captain of the show, so Captain Carol Friedman, who's voiced by Dawn Lewis. She is sort of trying to do this sort of balancing act that all captains do, where they demand respect and are admired and trusted by the crew, but then they also kind of have to be the bad guy. And a thing we play with a lot is that the lower deckers don't always get all the information they're delegated to, but they don't get to have a voice and they don't get to know the context a lot of the time. So sort of implying that because they're junior officers, they're probably not getting the full information about what's going on, and I'm sure that leads to a number of hijinks as well. The title of the story was sort of a very aggressive kind of, McMahon hints at next generation stars appearing in the show. That's sort of, once you actually read the article, what he says, it's right at the end about familiar voices, is no different than we've known since Destination Star Trek back in November, which is, he says that he would be a fool not to find some familiar voices to use in the show, but doesn't go into any more specifics than that. Bill, what did you think about this interview? And specifically, what did you think about these 2 new stills that we got?
I think the new stills are the big takeaway for me, particularly the one that seems to depict the characters kind of lounging in somebody's quarters and just seeing, the classical L cars and, a very traditional replicator.
Drinking margaritas, no less.
Drinking margaritas. It looks perfectly in line with everything that the show has been pitched to be. It's set very close to the end of Next Generation. In that sort of era, the set design looks very at home with what my head kind of expected to see. And yeah, I love the kind of vibrant colors of the animation. I think it looks really alive and interesting and fresh and different. So the stills are definitely what kind of grabbed my attention more than the interview itself, for the reasons you kind of very well laid out. A lot of what he gives Entertainment Weekly are not necessarily all regurgitated things that we've heard at previous appearances and old interviews that, you know, people who have followed this closely have probably seen before. But there are little tidbits in there that I kind of was interested to hear as well. The little description of how the captain's going to try to relate to the crew and a little bit of context for what to expect there felt different to me. I don't know that we had that before. If that was discussed in the past, I didn't remember it, so it felt fresh at least. Yeah, I'm excited to hear a little bit more about that, and to get a little bit of a better impression of the lower deckers as opposed to the bridge crew kind of relationship's going to work on the show. That it's not going to be exclusively lower deckers. We're going to see it through their eyes, I presume, but we'll come into contact with the bridge crew over the course of, you know, these missions and episodes. I'm liking everything I'm hearing, kind of like I said at the very beginning. With every little piece of information, it's sort of coming together into a nice puzzle of that I wanted to see kind of come together when the show was announced. Like you had said, and I said as well, a little hesitation at the very, very outset, but with each piece of information and things like these stills and just hearing more about it, I'm getting more and more excited to see how it all comes together. But my favorite thing about it really is the way he frames the show is it's taking these traditional Star Trek adventures and looking at them through a fresh angle. I love the idea of seeing, you know, the crew that are there doing the menial work and, you know, the grunt work on the ship, and, you know, aren't at the peak of their career and may never get there, may never get to where we see many of the other characters that we've grown to love over the other shows. I like the idea of exploring that, even if it is in like an animated comedic context. I'm very excited to see Star Trek stories told through a completely different lens, and, you know, who we're seeing the stories through.
Yeah, I love these little glimpses in the two stills, as you say, the LCARS that looks like it was taken off of the set of The Next Generation. Just the whole sort of atmosphere of it. One of them certainly seems like it's in whatever the bar is aboard the USS Cerritos, the one where they're drinking margaritas. And then the other one certainly seems to be sickbay from the presence of the Cation doctor, whose name that I forget, and seems to be quite an action scene. And you've got the captain and a few of the bridge crew and a few of the lower deckers are holding the Type 2 boomerang phaser from the sort of late Deep Space Nine and Voyager era of Star Trek, which you know, fits in pretty well and is so great to see, you know, that technology back again.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. It's neat to see delving back into the very familiar terrain that is so comfortable to so many of us, with simple things like, you know, the way a phaser looks, or, you know, the way the LCARS looks, or the way a replicator looks. Things like that we're already getting glimpses of in these stills are very comforting and very exciting if you're jonesing for that kind of fix, which I am to some extent. I love everything that has come so far. I'm a huge fan of Discovery and Picard, and I'm open to everything, but I'm definitely eager to scratch some of those nostalgic itches that I think Lower Decks is going to bring.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, hopefully, fingers crossed. I mean, it's no small thing to do a Entertainment Weekly story. James Hibbard, who was the author of the story, has sort of broken a lot of the big stories around the Kurtzman era of Star Trek. So hopefully this is a good sign for us learning more about the show in the weeks and months to come, including maybe perhaps, hopefully, fingers crossed, ideally, some kind of trailer coming soon, maybe even at virtual San Diego Comic-Con if there's a Star Trek panel there. And I guess it's just a few weeks away now.
Yeah, that's the hope.
Well, Akiva Goldsman is continuing to fill his time during lockdown by giving interviews and dropping hints about Star Trek Picard Season 2. And his latest time-filling interview, it was actually an interview with IndieWire, and he gave a bit of an update on where writing for the show is and some kind of, you know, hints of what we can expect to see in Season 2 of Star Trek Picard. So he sort of indicated that they've broken the whole season story, so they know what's going to happen in each of the episodes, and now they're in the process of scripting everything. Indicated they were about at the halfway point, maybe a little before the halfway point. So they're either kind of writing episode 5 right now or just about to start writing episode 5 and going into the full script phase. No details yet on when we can expect the show to film. That's all up in the air with the US being such a disaster as it relates to coronavirus. So no news on that. But he did talk a little bit about some of the possibilities for the season ahead. He did indicate the possibility existed that Brent Spiner could return to Star Trek Picard as Alton Soong. Obviously, Data's story is now 100% wrapped up, but But in the season finale, Spiner did play this new kind of previously unintroduced son of Noonien Soong, Alton Soong. And since Picard is now running around in a creation of Alton Soong, it stands to reason that there may be a reason for Soong to return later in the show. And Akiva Goldsman sort of acknowledged that and said we wanted to create a platform for which there could be more Brent in the ensuing seasons. He also said to expect more Starfleet in season 2. So we got very little of Starfleet in season 1. You had that sort of visit to the Starfleet archive in episode 1. You had Picard getting shouted down by Admiral Clancy in episode 2. Around the mid-season, you had Raffi sort of talking to her contact at Starfleet. I guess that was in the Impossible box. Another conversation with Clancy, and then you had the amazing scene of Captain Riker and the Starfleet Armada appearing in the season finale. But beyond that, not a huge amount of Starfleet in season 1. And Akiva Goldsman sort of indicated that was intentional, that season 1 was what he says essentially a story about Picard outside of Starfleet, and that in season 2, we're going to start making statements about the world of Starfleet, at least technologically, if not socially and culturally. These are the things that are likely to get a little more play than they did in season 1. So indicating that there might be a larger role for Starfleet in season 2, kind of who that is and what that looks like, don't know yet. Jonathan Frakes did say at the Trek Geeks Feed America fundraiser a couple of weeks ago that he would love to return as Riker in Star Trek Picard, and that he would also love to put the Starfleet uniform on again, so you could theoretically see it being Riker, but you could also see it being a number of other characters and also a number of new characters too, depending on the direction they take the story. And Bill, how does this have you feeling about Star Trek Picard season 2?
I'm excited to see more from Starfleet for sure. We did get very, very few and far between looks at what the Starfleet landscape was in the first season and the time depicted in the first season. I think, like you said, remembrance, maps and legends, little hints. We get that flashback at the very beginning of the end is the beginning with Picard resigning and talking to Raffi, but very, very little. And I'm interested for sure to see what the state of Starfleet is like, what's happening in Starfleet, how is this incident that pushed Picard out and kind of shaped the ensuing years, directed Starfleet in the years since, and what are their priorities? What are they doing? I think there are some promising tea leaves in this interview that point to that being a driving force, perhaps in season 2, and I'm all for that. I'm also interested to see more. I'm always down for more Brent Spiner. I'm intrigued by that character. That was an unexpected turn in that story. I did not expect to see Brent Spiner appear as another Soong, and I'm eager to learn more about him, that character, where he comes from, what are his origins, and I have some theories that I'm eager to see if I'm on any kind of right track or not. And so I'm interested to see what they do with that character as well. And like you said, I think with the obvious state of Jean-Luc Picard and his existential situation, I think it stands to reason that the story will naturally bring that character back around. I would assume. It seems like an easy pitch to get that to happen.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting story potential there. I mean, because we really did not learn anything about Alton Soong in Arcadia Ego parts 1 or 2, right? Like, he shows up, he sort of says, I'm Noonien Soong's son, and then the story kind of goes off in a different direction, and he is sort of a bit player to it. And I personally think there's a lot interesting there. I mean, it's, certainly the kind of fodder that a novel would take up at some point, but it would be nice to see some of that on screen as well, not least just to give Brent another opportunity to kind of play in this world and play opposite, Patrick and others, because he does it so well.
Yeah, it's always good to see him. And I think his performances always bring a little extra something, especially when he's not, of course, when he's playing Data, that's what made him famous. But I like his turns as Noonien Soong and Eric Soong. He's got that sort of, I like it when he goes slightly menacing and a little off the beaten path and unexpected territory than we're used to from him. And I think there's a lot of ground to mine with that character, and I'm eager for not necessarily answers. I'm all for mystery, and I'm not opposed to stories taking unexpected turns and throwing curveballs. I don't need a well-charted path that's predictable and is never unexpected, but there's certainly ground to be mined there, like I said, for interesting backstory and things to chew on. And it sounds like they have that in mind from this interview in particular.
Well, from one beloved actor returning playing a variation on a role that he is famous for, to the potential of another beloved Star Trek actor returning to play a variation on a role that he is famous for, Jason Isaacs has given an interview in recent weeks in which he's talked about his hopes about eventually returning to Star Trek and maybe playing the Prime Universe counterpart of the villainous Gabriel Lorca that he played in season 1 of Star Trek Discovery. If you've ever had the opportunity to listen to an interview with Jason Isaacs or see him at a convention, you will know that he very much enjoyed his time on Star Trek and felt very close to the cast of Star Trek Discovery, and, you know, has sort of intimated for quite some time, more or less since he left the show, that he would be really interested in returning in some capacity. And he was doing an interview with the Empire Film podcast and sort of admitted that he does from time to time have conversations with the producers about the possibility of him returning in some capacity, most likely as Prime Lorca, since Mirror Lorca was disintegrated into tiny little bits on the screen. And that doesn't necessarily in Star Trek terms mean that it's quite the end for that character if they decide they want to bring him back. But he does say, I admit that we talk. It's not like when Mirror Lorca bit the bullet, there wasn't a clamoring for Prime Lorca, but the thing is, it has got to be a great story. So it does sound like the conversations mostly revolve around potentially them sort of pitching him on ideas and him not quite being happy with them, because he says, you know, he's sort of talking about kind of his vision for Prime Lorca. He says he's going to have to be as interesting as ballsy, and you have to find him a ship and find him a context to bring him into a story. So we talk, he says, about talking to the producers. And when and if we come up with something we think is fabulous, I will happily go on a starvation diet required to slip into the snakeskin uniform again, referring to the quite snug Star Trek Discovery uniforms. Bill, what do you think? Prime Lorca, you want to see him back on I guess could be any show, right? Could be Discovery, could be Strange New Worlds, could be anything.
Yeah, it could be a short. I think with the current landscape, with so many balls in the air, a Section 31 show, Strange New Worlds, Discovery, of course, there are so many avenues that could be taken to do this if this is something they really want to do. But I kind of echo what Jason Isaacs says himself. I'm 100% open to it, and I loved his performance in the first season. But I don't feel that it has to be shoehorned in. Like if there's a really cool idea, whether it's in a short or in a bigger story for one of the full-fledged shows, I'm certainly open to it, and I'd be excited to see him again. But I don't feel like it's a mandate, and I hope they don't feel like it's a mandate. I hope they can find the right thing, and it sounds like that's the case, because it doesn't sound like Jason Isaacs is just going to do it. So my gut is that I think if I had to gamble a little bit of money, I think I would bet on a short trek at some point in the future, perhaps revealing what happened to Prime Lorca, or what his fate was. That seems in line to me with some of the things that they've done with short treks in the past. That seems like that would kind of fit in with the escape artist, that kind of idea, sort of a one-off what if, or an extension to a character story. But who knows? With this, like I said, with this Star Trek landscape as it currently stands, with so many balls in the air and shows in all different corners, and like you said, Star Trek has a long history of when they want to bring a character back, they will do it, and regardless of how you last saw them and what you thought you saw when you last saw them. There's a long track record of making that happen. So if they find a cool way and it makes sense and it's exciting, I have no doubt that they'll do it. I'm open-minded.
Well, I will say no more on this point, because this is my theory for this week, is two options for bringing back Prime Lorca. So we will return to this topic in just a few minutes. But our last story this week relates to CBS All Access, the Star Trek streaming platform in North America, and how a rebrand is coming and a new user interface for the service in perhaps the not too distant future. So this story is actually a few weeks old. This was an earnings call in May that Viacom CBS CEO Bob Bakish gave. And he said as part of that earnings call that CBS All Access will be both relaunched and rebranded soon, as it now moves to expand to incorporate more of the programming from Viacom CBS's other divisions, which includes networks like Nickelodeon. Obviously, there's Paramount Pictures on the movie side, MTV, Comedy Central, BET, a couple of other kind of big networks that they have access to, and then eventually CBS All Access will be rebranded as being the sort of one streaming home for all of the Viacom CBS properties that they have. That sort of process will kick off this summer. There's a new user interface coming for CBS All Access, which I'm quite looking forward to because it's always, I think, been one of the worst user interfaces of all the major streaming services. It's gotten better over the last couple of years, but a new one would be welcome. And also, we are already starting to see some of the Paramount movies begin to come over to the service. Obviously, the ones most relevant for us is the Star Trek movies. They're not all up on CBS All Access yet. I just checked before we recorded. The Voyage Home, Generations, First Contact, and Nemesis are currently available on CBS All Access, but the rest of the movies are not. They also talked about how the plan is to eventually launch CBS All Access services in international markets as well over the next year. Currently, the service is only available in the US, Canada, and Australia, and I believe of those three countries, Star Trek is only available on that service, at least the new Star Trek shows, in the US, because Discovery and Picard both have deals on Netflix and Amazon outside of North America and on CTV and Cray in Canada. But I think, there has been an open question about where do some of these new shows end up, like Lower Decks. There's obviously been all of these issues around the short treks coming out and where do they land. It does seem like if CBS were able to get its act together and launch its international version in some of these markets, that those would provide natural homes for some of these other new Star Trek shows without them having to go out and get deals with other providers in order to offer them, though. The sucky thing about that would be if you have to have a Netflix subscription to watch Discovery and a Prime subscription to watch Picard and a CBS All Access subscription to watch everything else. That's not necessarily ideal, but, fingers crossed, all that stuff can be worked out. I mean, I think it definitely does give them the most obvious platform for, they're not having to be all this uncertainty about simultaneous release worldwide for some of these shows if, Netflix or Amazon aren't as interested as they were in both Discovery and Picard. But Bill, what do you think about this news about CBS All Access?
I'm definitely for maybe some moderate improvements to the interface. I echo you that I think it's gotten a lot better over the past few years. I think going back, when I think back to, the very, very beginning, back to the Vulcan Hello days, so to speak, it was a little rough on just the interface and the basic, functionality of the app, I think. But I do think it's gotten better, but I like you, I think there's a lot of room for growth. There are a lot of streaming platforms out there, and there's a lot of thick competition with some apps that are really streamlined and really well run. And I think this is a promising step maybe toward having this platform take another step into that direction, being maybe a little bit more state of the art. And I mean, I have friends certainly across the pond who I think, like, if they could sort out everything you were just talking about with hopefully somehow getting everything under the CBS All Access umbrella, I'm sure they're friends of mine who would benefit from having CBS All Access with everything sort of there and having not to worry about, like you said, simultaneous distribution deals depending on which country and which series. I think that would be a positive outcome if that could all be sorted out. But most of all, I'm eager to see a new version of CBS All Access with a little bit more of a streamlined interface with the Paramount catalog, including all the movies. I think that would be great. Putting the entire Star Trek catalog in one place. I'd like to see them do things like, I'm a Criterion Channel subscriber. I love that service, and they have bonus features available for their movies and things that they have on there. I'd like to see maybe some things from the past maybe become available through something like this and have it be like the real place you want to be for, streaming Star Trek content, given it's its home. So there's some hopeful signs. I think I'm eager to see what they do with it and how it moves forward. But I'm interested to see where it goes. Yeah,
totally. We will see what happens. Fingers crossed for it getting better and better and more worth paying the money every month. All right. Well, we've talked about the facts, and now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
So each week, I and my guest give you a wish or theory we're nurturing about Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, Strange New Worlds, merchandise, the future of the franchise. So Bill, let's hear your theory or wish for this week.
My wish is very broad. You kind of alluded to it earlier that, the virtual San Diego Comic-Con is, for all intents and purposes, right around the corner. I'm really hoping for, some good news for so many of these things that are happening. I'm jonesing, the world is a pretty dark place right now, particularly if you live in the United States. I am jonesing for Star Trek to save the day and bring some positivity and optimism and some brightness back into my life, at least for an hour a week or a half hour a week if it's Lower Decks. My hope and my wish is for a show perhaps in the fall, whether it's Discovery or Lower Decks, depending on, obviously how their post-productions are moving forward with all of the challenges presented by COVID-19, I'm optimistic that perhaps something will come true there. But I am very hopeful that we'll get, at the very least, some more juicy news to chew on for all of these shows. Trailer for Lower Decks, like we talked about, maybe another trailer for Discovery Season 3. We had that very short teaser trailer back almost a year ago now, or
it was October.
October. Yeah, there's more marketing to be had there. I'm excited for that event in hopes of more Star Trek news and some hopeful signs for what's coming, hopefully in the back end of 2020. So that's my wish. Just more Star Trek to brighten up some of the grim realities that we're dealing with these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my confidence level about there being some kind of virtual Star Trek San Diego Comic-Con panel is growing, and that there being something as part of that. I think, a Discovery trailer and a Lower Decks trailer seem like the no-brainers. I mean, it boggles my mind a little bit that we haven't gotten at least a second Discovery Season 3 trailer since it's been now almost 10 months since we got the first one, and it's just about sort of cutting. You only need the first couple of episodes, cut some existing footage together, slap some existing music on it, and get it out there. I mean, it's not, that's why those things happen, early and quickly, is because they're not such a big lift. So it is a little surprising to me that's not happened yet. And that would be a perfect venue to do something like that. Also, maybe, to find out about the Section 31 show. I also have to wonder a little bit if there's some other stuff they can sort of do to generate some excitement. I remember San Diego Comic-Con last year, the possibility was raised about a 4K restoration for Star Trek the Motion Picture.
Yes.
That also seems like the kind of thing where I don't know enough about the technology to know if you could do that from home or not, but it seems like the sort of thing where you don't necessarily have to have people filming things in front of a camera. That does feel much more sort of computer-based, and therefore, possible, the kind of thing that's possible to be done remotely. So, either some announcements about, new shows and some of the existing shows that are on, or, something exciting like that would also be really interesting to get some official confirmation on.
Yeah, even more news on Strange New World, like the cast announcements, or, characters that may reappear from the short treks that we've seen and from the end of Discovery and when we saw the Enterprise Season 2. There's so many opportunities and so many hanging threads that are ripe for news stories and developments and revelations, and I feel like virtual San Diego Comic-Con is there's a decent track record there for the last few years that's been a benchmark where some things have come out of. So I'm hopeful that we'll get some interesting things to chew on and maybe some hopeful signs for release dates and things like that. That would make me very happy.
I'm totally with you. Fingers firmly crossed. As soon as we hear anything, it'll be a story on WeeklyTrek, and once it happens, we'll almost certainly do a wrap-up show to talk about everything we learned, as we've done for San Diego Comic-Con last year, STLV, New York Comic-Con, etc., etc. So my theory this week is coming back to the Prime Lorca conversation. I have two theories for ways in which Prime Lorca could make an appearance. No idea sort of what the story details would be, but two kind of hooks to entree him back into Star Trek, and neither of them are Discovery, since Discovery is off to the 32nd century. It seems a little odd that, Prime Lorca, who ended up in the Mirror Universe, would also end up back in the Prime Universe in 1,000 years in the future. So my two options would be, one, a Strange New Worlds two-parter, sort of like a, because it's supposed to be more of an episodic show. So, you have a bunch of episodes, then you have a special two-parter in which Jason Isaacs returns as Gabriel Lorca, and the Enterprise is involved in rescuing him, or they find him back in the Prime Universe or something like that. The other option would be that he ends up playing a role in the Section 31 show, because that does have Mirror Universe connections, obviously, with, Mira Georgiou being the main character on the show, even though it takes place in the Prime Universe, and her having a pre-existing relationship with the Gabriel Lorca of her universe. That would actually be a really interesting venue in which to bring back the character, because it would ultimately be a little more impactful and meaningful to the storyline of that show. Bill, faced with those two options, I guess, and you had raised the option of a short trek too. Any idea on preferences?
I think the Section 31 idea is perfect. I think the link to the Mirror Universe is already there. I think it would make sense for him to find himself in a kind of covert Section 31-ish environment coming out of the mirror universe. I mean, my impression is that when Kirk discovers the mirror universe on his own in Mirror Mirror, it's not known. Like that's not a known thing. So it would make sense to me, and it would be exciting to see Lorca, if he does pop back in, that he's somehow tied into Section 31 and can be folded into that show, and his origins, as well as Georgiou's, having to be closely guarded secrets for outsiders of Section 31. I love that idea. I think that would be a really cool wrench to throw into the concept of that show that I think would get people really excited. That would probably be my preference, but I'm not opposed to the Strange New World idea either. I think seeing Pike and Lorca, the captains of Discovery, together on a show not Discovery would be a really cool, interesting curveball and really cool Star Trek thing to see. So either one, I'm down for more Lorca. Like I said, if it's well written and it's a cool concept and it makes sense and is well executed, I'm first in line. I can't wait to see what they do with it. And all of those options are appealing to me. Do you have a theory or a wish for Discovery, Picard, or the future of the franchise that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at WeeklyTrek, and I might feature your theory in a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Bill Mann, for joining me today. Bill, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation? You can find me on Twitter at TrekFan4387. And you can find me on Twitter as well. I co-host TrekLive, which is a live stream conversation about all things Star Trek. Typically, that streams on Twitter, Periscope, on Sunday mornings around 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time. And it also appears on YouTube a little later in the week as a recording on the Trek Live YouTube channel. So in all those places. And you can find this show on Twitter at WeeklyTrek and me at Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you like our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you will turn to trekcore.com. Well, thank you, Bill. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper.